Welcome to Shadows at Dusk. Dusk is not the end. It's the doorway between two worlds. A place where stories slip through, quiet, cold, and true. You've entered that space now, and what follows is meant for you. Stay in the shadow. The vibration seized my phone at 3:47 p.m. on an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday. I was submerged in spreadsheets, navigating the labyrinthine columns of the quarterly report. An unknown number surfaced on the screen, bearing a stark message: "I see you." My gaze lifted from the monitor's glow. Through the office window, the familiar tableau of the parking lot unfolded. Scattered cars, colleagues migrating towards their vehicles. Yet a sudden frantic rhythm pulsed in my chest. I silenced the phone, placing it face down on the desk's cool surface. "Just a misdial," I murmured into the quietude of my workspace, though the words felt fragile, thin. 5 minutes crawled by before the next message arrived. "Emerald green suits you, Elias." My fingers instinctively sought the knot at my throat. Silk, undeniably green, chosen that morning. A faint tremor ran through them against the fabric. A bead of sweat traced a path down my temple. I rose, compelled towards the window again, scanning the asphalt expanse with renewed intensity. A crimson sedan, twin SUVs, the bulk of a delivery van. The usual afternoon traffic flowed beyond the lot's edge. No watchful eyes seemed fixed on my second-floor perch. "Security," I muttered, turning away. Cameras monitored the premises. Guards stood sentinel at the entrance. This creeping dread was illogical, foolish. My phone screen flared anew. Feeling exposed? I snatched the device, thumbs striking the keypad. "Identify yourself." The reply was instantaneous, a well-wisher, for now. Impulsively, I dialed the number. It rang just once before yielding to a sterile, automated voicemail, devoid of name or personality. I saved the contact under Spectre, capturing screenshots of our unnerving exchange. Digital breadcrumbs should proof become necessary. My palms felt slick. I wiped them absently on my trousers. The remainder of the afternoon stretched thin, time elongating with each anxious glance at my silent phone. By 5:30, I had almost convinced myself it was merely a juvenile prank, a number plucked randomly from the ether. The parking structure echoed cavernously as I walked towards my car, keys gripped like a talisman against the encroaching unease. The sharp report of my own footsteps seemed unnervingly loud on the concrete. The drive home became an exercise in vigilance, my eyes darting constantly to the rearview mirror. No pursuit materialized. The streets offered only the mundane spectacle of fellow commuters, a lumbering school bus disgorging its passengers, silhouettes walking dogs beneath the early street lights. Everything appeared distressingly normal. My house stood exactly as I'd left it, a white two-story structure nestled in a quiet neighborhood, the lawn overdue for attention, mail spilling from the box. The garage door groaned shut behind my car, sealing me within the familiar space. Inside, a ritual of clicks ensued as I secured every lock on every door, checked each window latch, drew the curtains tight against the gathering dusk. Routine, I told myself firmly. This has nothing to do with those messages. I shed my work attire, prepared a solitary meal, pasta sauce from a jar. The television droned, filling the silence with local news, weather forecasts, sports scores, the ordinary cadence of a Tuesday evening. The quiet held until 8 to 12 p.m. Then, the phone's screen illuminated the dim room. Your sanctuary looks inviting, Elias. My fork slipped, clattering against the ceramic plate. With hands that refused to steady, I typed, "Leave me alone. I'm contacting the authorities." The response was swift, dismissive. "Please do. What's the charge? Appreciating your decor?" I pushed back from the table, approached the front window, peeling back the heavy curtain just enough to peer outside. Streetlights cast pools of amber across the dark pavement. A lone car drifted past, its headlights momentarily sweeping the scene. Then stillness settled again, and I saw him. A figure stood on the sidewalk directly across the street, motionless, oriented in towards my house. The overhead lamp provided just enough illumination to discern dark clothing, a form blending with the night. His face remained an unreadable void. I let the curtain fall back into place, fingers already fumbling with my phone, dialing 911, the screen slick beneath my sweating thumb. 911, state your emergency. There's someone outside my house, watching. He's been sending messages all day. He's right there, across the street. My address spilled out, followed by a fractured account of the texts, my voice betraying the tremor within. "What's your address, sir?" "Units are dispatched, sir. Remain indoors and ensure your doors are secure. Are you alone in the residence?" "Yes." "Stay on the line with me until officers arrive." I edged back to the window. The figure hadn't moved, still staring. My phone vibrated. Another text. I glanced down while the operator's calm voice murmured in my ear. "The police are irrelevant, Elias. This is personal." Distant sirens began to keen, the sound swelling, drawing nearer. The man across the street remained impassive. "I hear them," I relayed to the operator. "Excellent. They should be arriving momentarily." The sirens crescendoed. Blue and red light pulsed against the facades of neighboring houses. Still, the watchers stood fast. 2 patrol cars swung onto my street, their lights bathing the scene in frantic flashes. Only then did the man turn his head, acknowledging their arrival. He didn't run. He simply walked a measured pace, carrying him around the corner, disappearing down Ash Street. "He's leaving," I reported, "heading east on Ash." 4 officers emerged from their vehicles, and 2 headed in the direction the figure had taken. 2 approached my front door. Ending the call with 911, I admitted them, showcasing the disturbing text log describing the man, tall, clad in darkness, face obscured by distance and shadow. Notes were taken, radios crackled with clipped exchanges. "We'll increase patrols in the area," one officer stated, his tone professional but offering little solace. "Keep everything locked tight. Call us immediately if he returns." Then they were gone, leaving behind a silence more profound than before. I rechecked every lock, armed the security system. I sat on the sofa, bathed in the glare of every light in the house, starting at each nocturnal creak, each rustle of leaves outside. At 11:45 p.m., one final message arrived. "Rest easy, Elias. until tomorrow. Sleep was a forgotten country. I called in sick the next day. My phone number was changed, a small, futile gesture. A security company installed cameras, their unblinking lenses becoming new, sanctioned watchers around my property. The texts stopped. The figure did not reappear. A week bled into 2. The knot of tension within me began to loosen, a fragile sense of normalcy tentatively returning. Then, yesterday, the mail delivered a plain white envelope, no return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper bore typed words. "Did you miss me? Look outside." I did. There he was, same spot across the street. But this time, as my eyes found him, he lifted an arm in a slow, deliberate wave. I am writing this now from a nondescript motel room, 50 miles from the house, now bearing a "for sale" sign. Job applications to distant states lie scattered on the cheap particle board desk. My phone just buzzed. A new message. "Quaint motel, Elias, but distance is no barrier." My gaze snaps to the window overlooking the dimly lit parking lot below. A shadow detaches itself from the deeper gloom, melts back again. He found me. This isn't finished. The sound of footsteps echoes in the corridor outside, growing steadily louder. They stop, directly outside my door, a sharp rap on the wood. I stare, paralyzed, at the doorknob. It begins to turn, slowly, smoothly. I hadn't locked it. The door swings inward, and I see... Transmission terminated. The first time that sound clawed its way up from the cellar, a raw grating of metal on stone, I knew something was fundamentally amiss. It was a Saturday afternoon, bleached pale by weak sunlight filtering through dusty windows. Alone in the vast quiet of the commercial shell, ostensibly mapping out the archaic electrical pathways, I froze. Every nerve ending prickled. The silence thickened around the memory of that abrasive scrape. Weeks prior, the deed to this husk of commerce had passed into my hands. An older structure, nestled in a neighborhood clinging to respectability, its price had seemed a fair gamble for potential refurbishment, perhaps a boutique or a lease to some hopeful local enterprise. The estate agent, brisk and efficient, had made no mention of the subterranean anomaly. It wasn't until later, measuring walls with my friend Liam, that we stumbled upon it. A narrow, corroded door tucked away behind the main fuse panel, almost swallowed by shadows. Its hinges shrieked in protest as we forced it open, revealing concrete steps, slick with damp, descending into a pocket of stagnant air, thick with the scent of wet earth and decay. My phone's beam sliced tentatively through the gloom, illuminating a cramped cavity below, barely commodious enough for a single compact vehicle, maybe 2 motorcycles pressed close. The concrete floor, a crazed map of fissures, wept moisture. Spidery veins of mold crept across the weeping walls, and a scattering of rusted tools lay abandoned in one corner. A naked socket gaped from the ceiling, its wiring frayed like ancient nerves, offering no functional light. Seeing little purpose in this forgotten appendage of the property, I retreated, consigning the space to the back of my mind. Then came the weekend dedicated to the building's electrical pulse, a self-imposed audit of its aged veins. Starting near the main entrance, I tested switches, probed outlets, scrutinized the breaker box. All seemed predictably antiquated, but functional. Eventually, duty called me back to that subterranean chill. Down the treacherous steps I went, each footfall echoing slightly, the air growing heavier, colder, the mildew tang sharp in my nostrils. My flashlight carved arcs through the tenebrous space. In a far corner, a secondary fuse panel clung to the wall, its metal cabinet blooming with rust at the edges. It yielded to a determined tug, revealing a chaotic jumble of fuses, some appearing prehistoric, one gap conspicuously empty. Muttering about the previous owner's negligence, I straightened, and then the noise, originating from my left, near a dilapidated shelf leaning against the far wall. A slow, deliberate drag, metal protesting against concrete. A vice clamped around my ribs. I swept the light towards the shelf, but stillness reigned. My voice, thin and reedy, called out, "Anyone there?" Silence answered, profound and waiting, punctuated only by the faint, rhythmic drip of water somewhere within the building's hidden plumbing. Echoes, I told myself, the building's settling, phantom sounds born of solitude and suggestion. I crossed to the shelf, displacing dusty cartons, peering behind it. Nothing but damp, stained concrete. Unease prickled, a cold counterpoint to the clammy air, but I returned to the fuse box. Minutes crawled by. Then again, the sound tore through the quiet, amplified, waited, as if something far heavier now scraped its laborious path across the floor. A visceral tremor ran beneath my skin. I dropped my screwdriver with a clatter and whirled, flashlight beam trembling. The emptiness mocked me, alone, undeniably alone, yet the pervasive sense of presence intensified. I paced the perimeter slowly, light stabbing into the deepest corners, where shadows clung like velvet. My heart hammered against my ribs. Nothing, no one, no object out of place. Flight was the only imperative. My legs felt leaden as I ascended the stairs, my grip slick on the flashlight. Back in the relative normality of the main floor, the sound echoed only in my mind. Plumbing, I reasoned, shifting debris, structural groans. But the rationalizations felt hollow. The sound had been too specific, too intentional. By evening, a new anxiety took root. Had someone breached the building's neglected defenses? A vagrant seeking shelter, perhaps? The old locks were flimsy. Could someone be lurking below? The thought festered. Tomorrow, I vowed, I would conduct a thorough, definitive search. Sleep offered no refuge. The grating noise became the soundtrack to my fitful dozing. Dawn found me pulling on work clothes, armed with a high-lumen torch and feeling slightly foolish but resolute, a short crowbar. The Sunday morning streets were hushed as I parked. Unlocking the main door, I bypassed the upper level and went straight for the basement. The familiar musty exhalation greeted me as I opened the narrow door. The steps groaned their usual complaint. At the bottom, I paused, sweeping the powerful beam across the space. It carved through the gloom far more effectively than my phone had, revealing only my own prior intrusions in the thin layer of dust coating the floor. No other tracks. I commenced a painstaking search. Behind the shelf, rested momentarily from the wall, in every shadowed corner, beneath the corroded tool bench, probing the fuse box alcove again. Nothing seemed disturbed. An hour yielded nothing tangible, leaving a residue of mingled relief and frustration, a nagging sense of being toyed with. Resigned, I turned to the neglected fuses, replacing the missing one, testing the ancient circuits, trying to ignore the persistent chill that seeped into my bones. By the time I finished, hunger gnawed. I gathered my tools and started up the stairs. Halfway up, the metallic scrape ripped through the air behind me, sharp, sudden, undeniable. I pivoted, the light spearing the void below. Empty concrete stared back. My hands began to shake. It was real, and it had emanated from the very spot I'd occupied moments before. Back down I crept, throat tight. "If someone's down here, I'm calling the police," I demanded of the shadows. Only silence replied, thick and watchful. Another circuit of the room, flashlight beam probing, senses straining. Nothing. The sound did not repeat. Defeated, nerves frayed thin, I went back upstairs, secured the basement door with a decisive click of the lock, and left the building entirely. Over the ensuing days, I focused my energies above ground, painting, patching windows, consulting with a flooring contractor. Yet the basement remained a locus of dread, a psychic weight behind its simple wooden barrier. Every pass near that threshold sent a shiver crawling up my spine, a corporeal memory of that grating sound. The next weekend, necessity dragged me back. I needed precise measurements. Wasting potential storage space due to spectral noises felt irrational. Clad in a heavy jacket despite the mild weather, I descended armed with a bright work light on a long extension cord, my phone fully charged, and a pocket knife, a flimsy talisman against the encroaching unease. I hung the work light near the fuse box, flooding most of the garage with its harsh, steady glare. Its luminescence offered a fragile shield against the gloom. Tape measure in hand, I worked methodically, jotting figures onto a clipboard, glancing constantly into the shadowed corners. An hour passed, marked only by my own movements and the ceaseless drip from unseen pipes. Sweat beaded on my forehead, born of tension rather than exertion. I was about to pack up when the work lamp faltered, dimming drastically for 2 long seconds before flaring back to life. And in that instant of murky twilight, I saw it, or thought I did. A silhouette, stark and vaguely humanoid, etched against the far wall near the old shelf. My breath hitched. My heart gave a painful lurch. I whipped the flashlight beam in that direction as the work light steadied. The wall stood bare, adorned only by peeling paint and streaks of dampness. I grabbed the work light itself, its cord trailing, and stumbled towards the spot, the beam dancing frantically. Nothing. No disturbance in the dust, no lingering impression, nothing. My hands shook violently now. The smell of mold felt suffocating, the cold air pressing in. A wave of claustrophobia washed over me. It was a shadow, I insisted silently, a trick of the flickering light, my own reflection caught at a queer angle. But the gooseflesh crawling on my arms screamed otherwise. Hurriedly, I began gathering my things. Right then, the grating erupted, immediate, deafening, directly at my back. It sounded immense, unstoppable. I spun, nearly dropping the lamp, the clipboard clattering to the concrete. Raw, impenetrable emptiness greeted me. A strangled gasp escaped my lips. Retreating step by agonizing step towards the stairs, never turning my back on the center of the room, I felt unseen eyes burning into my spine. I fled, slamming the door, the heavy padlock clicking shut like a final verdict. Since that day, the cellar remains a sealed wound in the building's heart. Each necessary descent is a trial by ordeal. My senses scream alert. Sweat slicks my palms. My pulse becomes a frantic drum against my ribs. Faint susurrations, like metal whispering on stone, sometimes drift up the stairwell when the building is quiet. A flicker in the peripheral vision, a deepening of shadow that vanishes upon direct gaze. Always, investigation reveals nothing, yet the emptiness feels pregnant, occupied. Logic offers no solace. I've inspected the plumbing, traced the walls for hidden cavities, checked the floor for loose plates or shifting foundations. Nothing accounts for that specific dragging scrape. Is it merely the architecture of stress, the mind projecting fear onto old walls and stale air? Perhaps. I speak of it to no one. The story feels too outlandish, the kind that invites ridicule or pity. The reinforced lock I installed feels laughably inadequate against something unseen. When forced below now, I move with hunted swiftness, propping the door wide behind me, ensuring a clear line of retreat back to the light. The chill bites deep, regardless of the season, and the mold's cloying breath clings to my clothes long after I surface. My chest constricts, my ears strain against the silence, waiting. It is a place I should not be, a place saturated with a palpable sense of waiting. I don't know what resides in that darkness. I only know that every time I set foot on those descending steps, I intrude. And whenever I leave, locking the door behind me, I feel something watching me go. The sun, already low-slung and bleeding gold behind a phalanx of sentinel pines bordering the property, cast long shadows as Elias killed the truck's engine. A peculiar tension coiled in his chest the instant his boots hit the needle-strewn dirt. Wind currents eddied through the high branches, the sound unnervingly intimate, like susurrations breathed directly against his ear. A swift scan revealed nothing but the stoic, bark-armored bulls and their swaying crowns. He drew a deliberate breath, attempting to expel the nascent anxiety, and began the task of unloading. Solitude was the objective. He forced his mind toward that promise. He hauled cartons into the compact living space. The cabin breathed age, floors of scuffed timber, a hearth built from river stones, windows filmed with neglect. Bags dropped near the worn sofa. Elias commenced a cursory inspection. The kitchen, stark and functional, held a small table tucked into one corner, its narrow window framing tall, unkempt grasses and the ever-present pines beyond. A profound quiet permeated the structure, a quality he initially welcomed. The ensuing hours dissolved into the rhythm of organization. Ceramic plates, finding homes in cupboards, tins of provisions stacked within the pantry's cool darkness. As twilight deepened, swallowing the remaining light, the cabin's interior grew dim. Elias ignited a solitary lamp, its amber glow pooling in the living room, before stepping back outside to survey the encroaching night. The sky had shifted to an indigo canvas, against which the tree line etched a jagged black silhouette. Another gust agitated the branches, and with it came a fleeting sound, faint as a distant utterance carried on the breeze. Gooseflesh pebbled his arms. His heart gave a solid thump against his ribs, yet the dimming landscape offered no source. Compelling himself toward calm, he stood for a long minute, gaze fixed on that dark wall of trees, then retreated indoors, the click of the deadbolt unnaturally loud in the stillness. Sleep proved elusive that first night. The mattress offered unyielding support, while the cabin's ancient timbers groaned and settled with unsettling frequency. Around 2, his eyes snapped open, convinced of a presence just outside. He lay immobile, listening, his breathing shallow, but captured only the wind's soft exhalations against the eaves. A parched throat drove him from bed into the kitchen's gloom. Moonlight, filtering through the dusty panes, illuminated a pale rectangle on the floorboards. He stood there a while, sipping water in the encompassing dark, his skin alive with a strange, anticipatory hum, as if bracing for something to lurch from the shadows. Nerves, he reasoned, simply the disquiet of relocation. Returning to bed, sleep eventually reclaimed him, though fitfully. Morning arrived crisp and bright, sunlight shafting through the windows, a welcome reprieve. Elias prepared breakfast, the simple routine grounding him, then resolved to explore the grounds. The cabin occupied a modest clearing, encircled on all sides by dense woodland. He walked toward the towering pines, the earth yielding a satisfying crunch of twigs and desiccated needles beneath his boots. Small tracks patterned the dirt, deer likely, though their spacing struck him as irregular. He traced them for a distance until they vanished into a thicket of overgrown grass. Venturing deeper among the trees, he noted several ancient stumps, their surfaces weathered by countless seasons, evidence of logging long past. Scratched into one, however, were peculiar markings, a series of intersecting lines, almost deliberate, yet defying interpretation. He ran his fingers over the grooves. They felt strangely smooth, worn down as if by repeated tracing with a blade or chisel. That familiar unease seeped back into his awareness. He registered the profound silence then. No birdsong, no skittering of unseen creatures, only the disembodied passage of wind through the canopy. An hour later, he turned back toward the cabin, a dull ache pulsing behind his temples, his breath coming quicker than his unhurried pace warranted, as though he'd been fleeing something unseen. He resolved to settle, perhaps lose himself in a book. Seated on the sofa, paperback open, Elias found the words blurring, unable to penetrate the oppressive quiet. It felt less like silence and more like a held breath, the world poised on some unseen brink. He considered music, but resisted. Acclimatizing to the quietude was part of the reason he'd sought this isolation. Later that afternoon, drawn by restlessness, he stepped onto the porch again. The wind had gained strength, rushing through the pines with a low, resonant whoosh. Instantly, the sensation of being observed prickled across his shoulders, the back of his neck growing warm. He methodically scanned the tree line, eyes probing the interplay of light and shadow. For a fleeting instant, he perceived a shape, indistinct, humanoid, standing motionless, half swallowed by the gloom between two thick trunks. He stared, pulse accelerating, but a branch dipped in the wind, obscuring the spot, and the impression dissolved into the sylvan darkness. Descending the steps, he advanced cautiously, needing to verify. Each footfall amplified his heartbeat. Reaching the location where the figure seemed to have stood, he found only a carpet of fallen leaves in the gnarled architecture of roots. He circled the vicinity, searching for footprints, broken twigs, any sign of passage. Nothing but uneven ground and scattered pine cones met his gaze. A wave of foolishness washed over him, yet the phantom image lingered, a persistent after-image suggesting it remained nearby, just beyond the veil of perception. Over the subsequent days, Ilias adhered to a self-imposed routine: early rising, coffee, a brief perimeter walk, hours spent cleaning, installing new locks, tending to minor repairs. Yet with each passing day, the woods asserted their disquieting influence. Soft whispers seemed woven into the wind's fabric, sometimes sounding like fragments of his own name, other times like unintelligible murmurs. Flickers of movement danced at the periphery of his vision among the trees, particularly as dusk bled into night. Each investigation yielded nothing tangible. His sleep deteriorated further. Lying awake, eyes shut tight, he could feel the frantic thrum of his pulse in his ears, amplifying every nocturnal sound: the groan of old floorboards, the sigh of a draft beneath the door. His thoughts circled relentlessly around the notion of something inhabiting the woods, something aware of his presence. He battled the rising tide of fear with logic, attributing it to an overactive imagination, yet couldn't ignore the tremor in his hands or the persistent knot of anxiety low in his stomach. One afternoon, impelled by a need for answers, Ilias pushed deeper into the forest than before. The air hung heavy, almost resistant, amplifying the sound of his own progress over the leaf litter. He began noticing the same pattern of lines he'd found on the stump, now etched into several living tree trunks. They seemed deliberately placed, forming an irregular, widely spaced ring encompassing his property. Each set of carvings bore the patina of age, worn smooth by time and weather. He paused, tracing the grooves on one massive trunk with his fingertips. They felt unnaturally cold despite the ambient warmth, smooth as polished bone. A visceral wrongness tightened his gut, a pressure building behind his sternum. He continued onward, noting each marked tree. Presently, he emerged into a small, unfamiliar clearing dominated by a large, moss-covered boulder. His legs felt unsteady as he approached. Faint scratches marred the boulder's upper surface, echoing the pattern on the trees. Crouching beside it, heart hammering against his ribs, he felt the wind around him abruptly cease, as if the entire forest held its breath. He extended a hesitant hand, touching the incised marks. A faint tingling radiated up his arm. A sudden sharp rustling nearby made him spin around, fists clenched, bracing for confrontation. Only swaying branches met his gaze. His breath came in ragged gasps. Deciding he'd seen enough, he turned and hurried back toward the dubious sanctuary of the cabin. That night became a vigil. Sleep was unthinkable. Ilias paced the confines of the living room, attuned to every external noise. Around midnight, extinguishing the lamp, he peered through the window. Clouds scudded across the sky, muting the moonlight. The forest silhouette seemed inkier, more menacing than usual. An unshakable certainty gripped him. Something stood among those trees, watching. The fine hairs on his arms lifted, his stomach clenched. His heart pounded with such force, he felt the pulse vibrating in his neck. The urge to flee surged. He snatched his keys from the coffee table, the metal cool against his palm, yet hesitated. Running from what might be a figment of his own strained psyche felt like surrender. He forced himself to remain, sinking onto the sofa, keys clutched tightly. He would confront this, whatever it was, a hollow resolution, devoid of strategy, yet it felt like the only option left. Questions swarmed his mind: the origin of the carvings, the nature of the fleeting shapes. No answers presented themselves. He stayed awake until the first gray light of dawn filtered through the dusty glass, his eyes burning with fatigue. The strange occurrences persisted, weaving themselves into the fabric of his days. Once, while splitting logs, a distinct voice murmured directly behind him, soft, like a whisper, yet undeniably close. He whirled, axe still raised, muscles coiled, expecting to find someone mere feet away. Emptiness greeted him. Only the wind sighed through the pines. His palms were slick with sweat, his grip on the axe handle precarious. He let it thud to the ground, leaning heavily against the woodpile, sucking in air. A tremor ran through his arms. That evening, an attempt to call a friend in town, seeking information about local lore, the carvings, as anything, proved futile. The phone connection fractured, sputtered, died. It felt like a deliberate isolation, the world conspiring to keep him ignorant and alone. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the useless device, his leg jiggling uncontrollably. The weak signal crackled with static whenever he managed a brief connection. Eventually, frustrated, he abandoned the effort. A few days later yielded another discovery. Circling the cabin's rear, he stumbled upon a narrow, overgrown path previously unnoticed. Flattened grass marked a faint trail leading past a thicket of thorny bushes. Pushing aside grasping branches, he followed it for perhaps 10 yards and came upon a dilapidated shed. Planks hung loose, nails wept rust, the door sagged drunkenly on a single hinge. Stepping inside released a puff of stale, musty air. Dim light filtered through gaps in the decaying walls, revealing discarded tools, splintered wooden crates, and a cobweb-shrouded lantern. He ventured deeper, kicking aside debris, the scent of damp earth and decomposition thick in his nostrils. There, on a broken piece of board, lying amongst the detritus, were more carved lines, identical to those on the trees. He picked up the fragment, a chill settling deep in his gut. Roughly a foot long, the pattern seemed meticulously rendered. A muffled thud from above sent his heart leaping. He spun around as a small chunk of wood, dislodged from a rafter, fell to the dirt floor, splitting neatly in two. It bore a similar marking. His throat constricted. These symbols felt omnipresent, inescapable. He exited the shed hastily, stumbling over a loose plank near the threshold, his knee cracking painfully against a frame. He limped back to the cabin, sweat plastering his hair to his forehead, thoughts chaotic, replaying the moment of discovery. Locking the door behind him, he leaned against it, struggling to regulate his breathing, his knee throbbing sharply. After applying ice from the small freezer, he collapsed onto the sofa, staring blankly at the opposite wall, flinching at every external sound. That night tested the limits of his endurance. The wind became a howling banshee, rattling the window panes. The trees outside groaned under the assault, the sounds twisting in his mind into low, guttural voices. He repeatedly rose to peer through the curtains, each time experiencing that familiar jolt of adrenaline, half expecting to see a face staring back. He He was slick with sweat despite the cool night air. His hands trembled. A persistent buzzing filled his ears. He craved answers, yet felt utterly directionless. Finally, succumbing to a desperate impulse, he grabbed a flashlight and plunged into the darkness outside. His heart felt dangerously close to bursting. He circled the cabin's perimeter, the flashlight beam cutting a nervous swathe through the oppressive black. Trees writhed in the distance. The wind bore those insidious, faint murmurs. His imagination populated the shadows with lurking forms. He forced himself onward. Completing the circuit, he stopped near the front porch, listening intently. His pulse hammered at his temples. The whispers seemed louder now, more distinct. He could hear his own breath, shallow and erratic. The flashlight trembled in his grip. Then, for a stark, frozen second, he saw it, a dark outline poised between two pines. Not exceptionally tall, perhaps his own height, but fundamentally wrong. His stomach lurched. He froze, every muscle tensed. The silhouette remained perfectly still. He willed himself to step forward, but his knees felt watery, unreliable. The wind shifted. A low-hanging branch momentarily blocked his view, and when he redirected the beam, the space was empty. He stood rooted, breathing hard, mind racing, grappling with the reality of what he'd glimpsed. The immense darkness of the surrounding woods felt palpable, pressing in, the trees themselves seeming to lean closer. He retreated backward onto the porch, fumbled his way inside, and secured the lock. His chest felt constricted. Killing the lights, he stood in the center of the living room, swallowing against a dry throat. A prickling sensation crawled from his scalp down his spine. Calm remained elusive for hours. Every time he closed his eyes, the silhouette materialized against the darkness of his eyelids. His body screamed for rest, but his mind remained hyper-vigilant, refusing surrender. In the ensuing days, Elias threw himself into practical tasks, seeking refuge in labor. He caulked cracks, reinforced window frames, applied fresh paint to worn interior walls. But the nocturnal presence only grew bolder. The whispers seemed to emanate from just beyond the walls now. He sometimes heard what sounded like soft footfalls on the porch planks, or was it merely the old house settling? Certainty remained tantalizingly out of reach. Opening the door always revealed nothing but the empty night. The constant tension knotted the muscles in his neck and shoulders, his back perpetually stiff, headaches becoming frequent companions. The thought of packing, of simply driving away, became a recurring temptation. Yet a countercurrent held him fast, a strange, magnetic pull. The forest hummed with an ancient narrative, one that seemed to demand his attention. The carvings, the fleeting figures, the sibilant voices, all hinted at something old, something watchful, something that desired acknowledgement. But how to respond? There were no instructions, no clear adversary, no tangible proof beyond his own frayed nerves and the cryptic marks scarring the landscape. Last night, he sat on the porch again, flashlight off, attempting silent observation. The forest presented an impenetrable wall of black. Clouds obscured the moon, visibility limited to mere yards. His body remained rigid, heartbeat a heavy drum against his ribs. He waited, straining ears and eyes for any sign, any sound beyond the wind's intermittent sighs. Those sighs carried the whispers, sometimes teasingly forming his name, sometimes dissolving into meaningless susurrations that raised gooseflesh. His palms were damp, his throat tight. He remained there until the first tentative strokes of dawn painted the eastern sky. Rising stiffly, bones protesting, he went inside. He drained a bottle of water, leaning against the kitchen counter, vision slightly blurred from exhaustion. His mind felt stretched thin, abraded, yet he was still here, confronting the same terrifying silence. One part of him craved collapse, oblivion, while another remained coiled, perpetually braced for something to shatter the windows, to breach the thin walls. It is morning once more. Elias writes this, in an attempt to impose order on the chaos within. His hand trembles as the pen moves. The cabin feels suffocatingly small, yet the woods outside pulse with an inscrutable vitality. How much longer he can endure this limbo remains uncertain. His heart seizes every time he contemplates stepping outside, but remaining indoors is its own form of torment. Peace is absent from this place. The wind whispers this truth nightly. The shadows confirm it. An old presence resides here, insistent, demanding his attention, indifferent to his desires. His next move is unclear. He knows only that he is caught, suspended between the terror of flight and the terror of remaining. And with every gust that stirs the pines, he hears those voices reminding him that he has wandered into a story that has no intention of letting him go. The grand repose of the parlor fractured the instant I registered the displacement of the furniture. From that precise second, I understood this house-sitting obligation would be leagues removed from the mundane. What commenced as a simple courtesy for my neighbor rapidly devolved into a chilling pas de deux with entities utterly defying logic, leaving my sanity frayed and my spirit imperiled. My name is Ilara. Until a mere month ago, I navigated the urban sprawl like countless other 25-year-olds, striving to balance finances and aspirations. When Mrs. Holloway, my elderly neighbor, residing in the adjacent Victorian behemoth, inquired if I might oversee her home during a week-long visit to her sister, the proposition shimmered like an oasis. An interlude of silence within a magnificent mansion, a respite from my clamorous flatmates. Paradise beckoned, if only the knowledge of what festered behind those ornate facades had preceded the acceptance. The initial day unfolded without incident. Much of it was consumed by wandering the labyrinthine corridors, admiring the time-worn furnishings and the elaborate filigree of the woodwork. Mrs. Holloway had provided meticulous directives regarding her botanical charges and the feeding schedule of her feline companion, Cinder. Everything appeared reassuringly conventional. It was upon the second night that normalcy began to fray. As I prepared for slumber, a distinct thump resonated from the lower level. Attributing it to Cinder's nocturnal explorations, I descended to investigate. Yet upon entering the living room, inertia seized me. The ponderous mahogany coffee table, previously anchored firmly in the room's center, now stood flush against the distant wall, not merely nudged, but transposed entirely to the chamber's opposite boundary. What in creation? I breathed, eyes darting, seeking any rationale for its migration. Nothing. No gouges marred the polished floorboards. Cinder remained conspicuously absent. Rationalization clawed its way forward. Perhaps exhaustion played tricks. Perhaps my memory of the table's placement was flawed. With considerable effort, I returned it to its presumed original station and retreated upstairs, a disquieting chill settling deep within my core. The following morning, I clung to the belief that the previous night's anomaly was a figment of fatigue. Descending for breakfast, however, another incongruity arrested my steps. The portraits lining the hallway hung askew, each tilted at a discordant angle as though a mischievous hand had deliberately disturbed their alignment. My pulse quickened. I possessed absolute certainty they had hung perfectly straight the day prior. I'd even remarked to Mrs. Holloway on the impeccable order of her home. While writing the frames with trembling fingers, another detail snagged my attention. In a corner of the living room, previously occupied by naught but unadorned wall space, there now existed a door. Diminutive, almost scaled for a child, its surface was a tapestry of complex carvings. Tentatively, I approached, curiosity dueling with a rising tide of dread. As my hand extended towards the knob, I could have sworn phantom whispers coiled from beyond the wood, faint, yet undeniably present. My hand recoiled as if scorched. Impossible. Doors do not simply materialize from ether. Closing my eyes, I inhaled deeply, counting slowly to 10. Upon reopening them, the portal had vanished. The remainder of the day passed in a state of hypervigilance, each creak and groan of the old structure jolting my nerves. Distraction through cleaning proved futile. An omnipresent sensation of being watched clung to me. The painted eyes within the portraits seemed to track my movements, and peripheral flickers of motion dissolved into nothingness the moment I turned. Sleep offered little refuge that night. Each descent towards unconsciousness was violently interrupted by the phantom tread of footsteps in the corridor or the unsettling caress of something unseen against my skin. Dawn found me frayed and hollowed. I resolved to contact Mrs. Holloway to confess the unsettling events and withdraw from the remainder of the week. Yet as I recounted the migrating furniture and the spectral door, her response was a light chuckle. "Oh, that's merely the house settling, my dear," she offered breezily. "It possesses its little quirks, nothing whatsoever to fret about." But an undertone lingered in her voice, a subtle inflection of amusement. A suspicion bloomed. Did she possess knowledge she withheld? As the days bled one into the next, the phenomena intensified. Volumes launched themselves from shelves as I passed. Pockets of unnatural cold materialized abruptly in certain rooms, my breath misting in the frigid air. And the whispers? They became a constant susurrus, a low, indistinct murmuring perpetually at the edge of hearing. Symbols began to manifest upon the walls, strange, arcane sigils that seemed to writhe and shift just beyond direct focus. They permeated everything, woven into the wallpaper's intricate patterns, etched subtly onto the floorboards, shimmering within the reflective depths of mirrors. One sleepless night, driven by a desperate need for answers, I turned to my laptop, delving into the property's lineage. The findings sent ice through my veins. The mansion was erected in the late 19th century by one Silas Holloway, Mrs. Holloway's great-grandfather. Local lore painted him as a dabbler in the occult, alleging clandestine midnight assemblies where bizarre chants echoed into the surrounding night. Legend whispered of a pact Silas forged with an unnamed entity, a covenant promising power and longevity in exchange for periodic sacrifices. The accounts were nebulous, yet chronicled dozens of disappearances over the decades in the vicinity of the estate. As I absorbed these chilling narratives, the whispers encircling me swelled, growing more insistent, more demanding. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was madness, an elaborate hoax perhaps, or a descent into psychological collapse. Yet a deeper certainty resonated within me. The occurrences within this house were tangibly real, and their nature transcended any terror I could have previously conceived. The subsequent day, the diminutive door reappeared, this time materializing within my own bedroom, and now it stood ajar. Through the opening swirled a vortex of abyssal darkness, sporadically illuminated by flashes of otherworldly luminescence. The whispers emanating from it gained clarity, promising dominion, enlightenment, the fulfillment of every latent desire. If only I would cross the threshold. Transfixed, I stood rooted, an almost overwhelming magnetism drawing me towards the aperture. Surrender seemed seductively simple, an effortless yielding to the encroaching void. It was then that a soft meow broke the spell. Cinder sat at my feet, gazing up with wide amber eyes. In that instant, the enchantments shattered. Scooping the cat into my arms, I fled, propelled by sheer terror, not pausing until I was out of the house and sprinting down the street. The remainder of the week unfolded within the sterile anonymity of a motel room, my only returns to the Holloway residence being swift, necessary excursions to replenish Cinder's provisions. Each re-entry confirmed the escalating wrongness. The sigils on the walls pulsed with greater prominence. The whispers achieved a near-deafening volume, and the very atmosphere seemed to throb with a sentient malevolence. When Mrs. Holloway returned, I awaited her arrival, resolved to demand elucidation. But the moment our eyes met, recognition dawned. Her gaze held the same void-like luster I'd glimpsed shimmering beyond that impossible threshold. "Did you find your stay agreeable, dear?" she inquired, her smile stretched just fractionally too wide. "The house appears to have developed quite an affinity for you." A choked excuse tumbled from my lips as I retreated, legs trembling so violently that walking became a precarious act. Driving away, a final glance in the rearview mirror captured Mrs. Holloway standing on the porch. For a fleeting, horrifying second, her figure seemed to ripple and distort, hinting at something ancient and monstrous beneath the benign, grandmotherly guise. A month has elapsed. I inhabit a new apartment in a different city, yet the pervasive sense that the ordeal remains unfinished haunts me. Occasionally, in the profound stillness of night, the whispers resurface, beckoning from the deepest shadows of my room. And sometimes, behind closed eyelids, the image of that small, intricately carved door persists, patiently awaiting my passage. What lies beyond that threshold I cannot fathom, nor can I comprehend the price Mrs. Holloway, if that name is even truly hers, bartered for the power she evidently wields. But this much I know with chilling certainty. Some doors are inviolable. Some boundaries must never be breached. For once you have peered into that abyss, once you have heard the siren song of the darkness, its grasp never truly relinquishes its hold. And somewhere, within a beautiful Victorian mansion harboring a profound secret, a small door waits for another soul, curious or desperate enough to turn the knob once more. I pray fervently that soul is not mine. It was on a Wednesday under a sliver of moon that the aqueous impressions first materialized. I, Elias, had been sole occupant of the salt-scoured house for precisely 1 week. Nothing uncanny was anticipated. I craved the hush, the literal solitude, a necessary balm for the fraying edges of my concentration as I wrestled with the looming work deadline. This place, a summer haunt for Marcus and our circle, shed its conviviality with the season. Winter rendered it spectral. The village tucked itself in early, the night air seldom troubled by engines or voices. Only the ceaseless dialogue of wind and wave remained, and me caught between. Midnight had passed before exhaustion claimed me that first night. Sleep, when it came, was shallow. Thirst, sharp and sudden, roused me near 3. I rose, patting down the corridor's cool timber towards the kitchen's promise of water. An unusual chill permeated the house, the floorboards groaning underfoot like old bones settling. A brine-laced dampness hung in the air, thick as sea fog. A forgotten window, perhaps? The sliding glass door at the rear, a portal to the sandy track meandering towards the ocean's edge, stood fast, its lock secure. Turning back through the dim kitchen, my gaze snagged on the floor tiles. There, glistening under the weak moonlight filtering through the window, were footprints, wet, bare, unmistakably human. They commenced near the glass door, marching halfway across the linoleum before dissolving into nothingness around the corner leading to the living area. I froze, mind scrabbling for reason. A spill? No, these were perfectly formed impressions, heel and toe distinct, leading inward from the threshold. I trailed them, a knot tightening in my gut. Near the living room's threshold, where tile met carpet, they faded, evaporating entirely. No puddle, no lingering moisture trail, just those stark, inexplicable prints. Panic fluttered, a trapped bird against my ribs. I retraced my steps, peering behind the sofa's bulk, wrenching open closets, my breath catching with each empty revelation. I slid the back door open again, scanning the pale expanse of sand under the weak lunar glow. Vacant, empty. I secured the lock, the click echoing too loudly in the silence. Kneeling, I scrubbed at the marks with paper towels until the floor was clear, telling myself it was condensation, a quirk of coastal humidity, a leak I hadn't found. Perhaps the wind had forced droplets beneath the door's seal, a flimsy shield against the rising tide of unease. Water doesn't mimic human feet by chance. Sleep became an impossibility. Back in bed, every sigh of the wind, every settling creaks of the old house became magnified, sinister. My pulse has hammered a frantic rhythm against my eardrums. Half-hourly pilgrimages to the kitchen yielded nothing more. The floor remained barren. Dawn arrived gray and unwelcome. The following day was a study in forced normalcy. I chained myself to the small table in the living room, words blurring on the screen. My eyes kept straying to the glass door, searching the dunes beyond. Nothing. Around noon, seeking respite, I walked the beach. The wind bit, raw and saline. Gulls wheeled against a pewter sky. The sand, cold beneath my soles, stretched empty in both directions. This daytime desolation usually brought peace, but the memory of the footprints clung like damp sand. That night repeated the pattern, yet amplified the dread. Sleep claimed me near 11, a brief surrender. Again, the witching hour, close to 3. This time, a sound preceded my waking, a soft, dull thudding against the back door. Not a sharp rap, but a persistent, muffled impact, like something heavy and yielding being pushed against a glass. My heart leaped, a frantic drum against my ribs. I lay frozen for a beat, then 2, before swinging my legs out of bed. The flashlight, my bedside sentinel, felt cold and solid in my hand as I crept down the hallway, bare feet recoiling from the chill floorboards. Reaching the kitchen's edge, I held my breath, listening. It came again, thump, 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 slow, deliberate. The glass in the door shivered faintly, as if under pressure. Adrenaline surged. I snapped on the overhead light, the sudden glare momentarily blinding. My stomach clenched. Through the glass, nothing but darkness. Wind? A loose shutter? The knocking sounded once more, softer now, almost pleading. Taking a ragged breath, I gripped the cold metal handle and pulled the door inward. Emptiness greeted me. The vast, dark expanse of the beach lay undisturbed. I swept the flashlight beam across the sand, searching. No prints, no sign of passage. A gust of wind pushed past me, carrying the raw, cold scent of the deep ocean. My breathing grew shallow, rapid. I slammed the door shut, ramming the lock home. My hand shook. Then, from the hallway behind me, a sound. A low, wet friction, like sodden fabric being dragged across timber. Heavy, slow. I spun, flashlight beam stabbing into the shadowed corridor. The kitchen light above me flickered erratically, resisting my attempts to steady it at the switch. A step forward, and an icy current traced its path from my nape to my wrists. The flashlight's cone danced along the walls, illuminating only empty space. Towards the living room I moved, the soles of my shoes squeaking on the floorboards. The air grew thick with an overpowering odor, briny and vegetal, the smell of seaweed left to rot in the sun. It clawed at the back of my throat. I scanned the living room. Furniture stood in its familiar configuration. The main light continued its sputtering fit, but a small table lamp near the sofa consented to cast a weak, intermittent glow. No movement. Silence, save for the frantic thrumming in my ears and the refrigerator's low hum. The remainder of the night was a vigil. Every light blazed. The television droned, a meaningless shield against the silence. Sleep, when it finally ambushed me near dawn, found me slumped on the sofa, unwilling to brave the dark passage back to my room. Morning brought a stiff neck and the gray light of another day. A thorough inspection revealed no new prints, yet the faint, pervasive odor of the sea, of decay, lingered despite sealed windows and locked doors. Driven by a need for tangible proof, I went outside, circling the house, scrutinizing the sand for any sign of intrusion, any disturbance. Nothing. Just the familiar tableau of the off-season, shuttered neighboring houses, driftwood skeletons scattered on the shore, the lonely cry of gulls. I tried Marcus, my friend, the house's co-owner. Voicemail. I left a halting message, mentioning the strangeness, the unease, asking if such things had happened before. My phone remained silent throughout the day, each check a small disappointment. Evening drew in, bringing with it a rising tide of indecision. Pack? Flee? My work, though progressing, felt secondary to the gnawing fear. The nights were unbearable, yet a stubborn part of me resisted. One more night. Perhaps it was just an old house, settling, pipes groaning, condensation playing tricks. Logic felt thin, threadbare, but I clung to it. Dinner was a tasteless microwave meal. I forced myself to stay awake, bathing the house in artificial light, the television a constant flickering companion. Around midnight, exhaustion began its siege. My muscles screamed with tension, eyes burning. After brushing my teeth, I retreated to the bedroom, leaving the hall light and the bedside lamp burning. I locked the door behind me. 3 a.m. again. No knocks this time. Instead, a dry, scraping sound from the hallway, traveling along the wall outside my door. Scratch, 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 like fingernails drawn deliberately across wood. My heart hammered against my sternum. Sweat beaded on my forehead. I reached for my phone, then hesitated. Who would come? The nearest town felt worlds away. Was this even a crime? Unlocking the door, I eased it open a fraction, peering out. The hallway light flickered, weaker now, casting long, dancing shadows. That pervasive, salty stench filled my nostrils. The scraping intensified, sounding impossibly close, yet the corridor remained stubbornly empty. "Hello?" I whispered, the sound swallowed by the oppressive quiet. My mouth was desert dry. Flashlight held like a weapon. I edged forward, glancing repeatedly over my shoulder, the nape of my neck prickling. I reached the kitchen's black maw. The switch yielded only a final, desperate flicker before darkness consumed the overhead fixture. Only the stove's small clock light offered a feeble luminescence. On the floor, catching that dim glow, were droplets of water. A fresh trail leading from the back door across the tiles towards the living room. Again, I crouched, touched one, ice cold. Standing, I followed the glistening path. It ended precisely where the living room carpet began. The dragging sound returned, emanating from within the living room itself. I stepped onto the carpet, heart pounding. The floor lamp sputtered, blinked, but held. And then I saw it. Near the window, partially obscured by the heavy curtains, a presence. Tall, indistinct, a silhouette against the faint light from outside. For less than a second, it registered, and then the lamp blinked out, plunging the room into blackness. A thunderous pulse roared in my ears. I heard it, wet, shuffling footsteps on the carpet, moving away from me. When the lamp flickered back to life moments later, the space by the window was empty. The curtains hung motionless. I lunged towards them, yanking them aside. Nothing, no one outside. No damp marks on the carpet near the window. Only that suffocating marine odor, thick and cloying like the hold of a fishing trawler. My control shattered, tremors racked my body. My hands shook uncontrollably. My head throbbed. Breath came in ragged gasps. I switched on every lamp that still functioned and collapsed onto the sofa, eyes darting around the room, anticipating the next horror. Fleeing felt logical, necessary, yet inertia held me captive. If I left now, would I ever understand? Was this real, or was exhaustion finally fracturing my sanity? Skepticism is my nature, or proof is my requirement. But the water, the sounds, the smell, they were undeniable sensory data. I forced myself to endure until sunrise painted the windows gray. In the pale morning light, the house seemed to regain a semblance of normalcy. The oppressive smell had lessened, though it hadn't vanished. The living room carpet was dry, unmarked. No forced entry, no damage, save for the persistently flickering lights, even now. I tried a new bulb in the kitchen fixture. It made no difference. A call to an electrician yielded a promise to try to come in a few days. Urgent, I stressed. He remained non-committal. Around noon, Marcus finally returned my call. I recounted the events, the words tumbling out. A weighted pause hung on the line before he spoke. He'd never experienced anything similar, he admitted, but then he'd never braved the house alone in the dead of winter. His advice was simple. If you feel unsafe, Elias, leave. I agreed instantly. Packing was a frantic affair. Closing windows, switching off breakers, lock his doors. Each action felt weighted with finality. Suitcase rattling behind me, I loaded the car. One last sweep, I told myself. The living room stood silent, the kitchen quiet. I stepped into the hallway, heading towards the bedroom for my forgotten laptop bag, and stopped. There, leading from my bedroom door, stark against the wooden floor, was a fresh set of wet footprints, barefoot, glistening, as if someone had just emerged from the ocean depths and walked this path moments ago. They tracked towards the living room, ending abruptly at the carpet's edge. I froze, ice water flooding my veins. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of algae and brine. The fine hairs on my arms prickled upright. No sound escaped my lips. I turned, walked swiftly, deliberately into the bedroom, snatched the laptop bag, and fled the house without a backward glance. I didn't pause to clean or secure anything further. I locked the front door, scrambled into the car, and drove. The rearview mirror reflected the shrinking house, the desolate beach, until they were swallowed by the distance. A persistent tension remained coiled in my chest, the unnerving sensation of being watched receding only slowly with the miles. Now ensconced in a friend's city apartment, the beach house feels like a fever dream. Marcus and the others have pressed for details. I offered only the facts, the prints, the sounds, the smell that still haunts my memory. Speculation feels futile. At night, fragments return, footprints ending inexplicably, phantom knocks, the suffocating scent of the abyss. I wake, check my surroundings, dry floors, solid walls. Yet the question lingers, cold and persistent. What resided within those walls? Does it remain? I have no answers, only the certainty that I will never again seek solitude in that place by the sea. The memory remains sharp, crystalline, the day those Victorian looking glasses came into my possession. I was navigating an estate sale, a cavernous room choked with the ghosts of furniture past, relics and remnants adrift. My own little shop, tucked away on a less trodden street, wasn't exactly flourishing, though a dedicated clientele kept the lights on, drawn to vintage speculums and curiosities. Then I saw them, 5 tall mirrors, arrayed like sentinels against one wall. Intricate woodwork framed their surfaces, the timber dark and telling. Faint blooms of tarnish crept along the silvered edges. Heavy, yes, and time-worn, yet some indefinable quality snagged my attention. Decades sequestered in an attic, the seller murmured. An impulse buy. Surely, I reasoned, cleaned and restored, they'd fetch a respectable sum. I wrestled them onto my battered pickup, the journey back punctuated by the muffled clatter of glass against glass, despite the swaddling blankets. A burn settled deep in my muscles as I unloaded them, one by painstaking one, leaning their considerable weight against the rear wall of my shop, a cramped space, already dense with inventory. A cursory wipe banished the worst of the dust, but the glass itself received little scrutiny. Haste propelled me that day. Morning arrived. I entered the shop perhaps 30 minutes before the open sign turned, flipping the switches. Light flooded the space, catching the surfaces of the new arrivals. Immediately, something felt asynchronous in the central mirror's reflection. A ripple, a distortion in the antique glass, I first assumed. Stepping closer dissolved that theory. My likeness stared back, faithful in most respects, save for the subtle geography of my hair, parted on the opposite side. My hand instinctively traced the familiar line across my scalp. The mirror showed its inverse. A glance confirmed the other 4 reflected true. A shrug, a dismissal. Warped glass, nothing more. Later, a patron inquired about the quintet. Not yet ready, I explained, detailing plans for refinishing the frames, polishing the glass to a gleam. Even as I spoke, my gaze kept drifting, snagging on that central mirror. My reflection seemed to possess a fractional delay, a subtle hesitation, like watching a poorly synchronized film. Disquiet stirred, a low hum beneath the surface, but I held my focus on the customer. After his departure, I turned my attention elsewhere, pricing ceramics, deliberately ignoring the silent watchers on the wall. Days bled into a week. I rearranged, giving the mirrors prominence along the left wall, angling them just so. Patrons admired the craftsmanship, the gnarled beauty of the frames, yet none committed to a purchase. During lulls, I found myself drawn to them, a moth to enigmatic flames, searching their depths for flaws. Sometimes the second from the left granted me an inch or two of illusory height. The first occasionally sculpted me leaner. Often, frustratingly, they presented a perfect, unremarkable mimicry. Curiosity, initially a spark, kindled into a persistent flame. Notebook in hand, I began a systematic examination. Mirror 1, me, clad in my usual denim and tee, but etched with a weariness I hadn't noticed moments before, fine lines spidering from the corners of my eyes. Mirror 2, paradoxically, it shaved off years, smoothing the landscape of my face. Mirror 3, normalcy reigned until I perceived an unfamiliar ramrod straightness in my posture, an air of quiet confidence I didn't possess. The fourth harbored the most peculiar effect. My clothes were accurate, but a faint, spectral scratch marred the glass directly over my reflected left shoulder. No such imperfection existed on the physical pane. Mirror 5 seemed the least temperamental, yet occasionally a flicker, a minute tremor unsynced from my own stillness, would catch my eye. Unease prickled, though I reasoned it away. Old glass, tricks of light, fatigue, swapping bulbs yielded no change. Customers began to remark on the reflection's eccentricities. Some found it novel, others confessed to a creeping sense of the uncanny. I became increasingly tethered to the mirrors. At closing time, I'd linger, staring into the sequence of reflected selves. My breath would grow shallow, tension knotting the muscles in my neck. First mirror, second, third. My image subtly transmuting, morphing in ways that defied logic. A phantom limp sometimes manifested in the second glass, though my legs were sound. The third occasionally adorned my hand with a ring I'd never owned, never worn. One evening, immersed in late-night inventory amidst dimmed lights and stacks of porcelain, my peripheral vision snagged a discrepancy, a movement asynchronous. I froze, heart slamming against my ribs, breath caught in my throat. In the second mirror, slowly, deliberately, my reflection raised its left hand. My own arms remained rigidly at my sides. A chill, profound and invasive, traced its way down my spine. My fingertips tingled. The reflected hand lowered. The reflected head turned, gazing away into the mirrored depths. My eyes scanned the shadowed shop. Stillness. Slow, deliberate breaths did little to ease the vice around my chest. I advanced, closing the distance until mere inches separated me from the glass. My reflection stared back, now a perfect mimic. Arm raised, it raised its arm. Head turned, it mirrored the motion. A tremor began in my legs, a seismic instability I fought to control. After a long minute, I retreated. A swift check of the other mirrors revealed nothing amiss. Locking up with fumbling hands, I fled to the sanctuary of home, the night spent wrestling wakefulness. The image of that autonomous gesture seared behind my eyelids. Logic offered no solace, no explanation. The following day demanded normalcy, a forced denial. It was imagination, stress. I opened shop and tended to customers, lost myself in tasks. Around midday, during a brief respite, I found myself before the fourth mirror, the one with the phantom scratch. Observing closely, my reflection seemed standard until a jolt of recognition. The scratch aligned perfectly with a faint crescent scar on my shoulder, legacy of a long-ago encounter with a misplaced nail. In ordinary mirrors, the scar was negligible, almost invisible. Here, the spectral mark highlighted it, pinpointed it. My pulse leaped. My fingers sought the faint ridge beneath my shirt. By the close of the second week, each mirror had unveiled its own private alteration. One reflection sported spectacles. Another bore a small, indistinct tattoo on the forearm. A third presented a faint shadow of a beard. These glimpses were fleeting, random, never simultaneous across the panels. A constant tension became my companion, a perpetual waiting for the next variance. Since in the shop's empty hours, I paced, rubbing my hands, flexing my shoulders against the accumulating stress. I took to leaving the lights burning after closing, unable to face the potential of walking into darkness, populated by those silent, watchful surfaces. One evening, resolve hardening, I locked the doors and draped each mirror in old drop cloths. Concealing them brought an unexpected wave of relief, a quieting of the internal static. I left, collected takeaway, and sought refuge in my apartment, the silence a balm. Sleep, for the first time in days, came deep and unbroken. Morning light. I returned, pulling back the sheets to ensure all was secure. The mirrors gleamed innocuously under the fluorescent tubes until I noticed them, faint, greasy smears marring the glass, vaguely shaped like handprints emanating from within. My stomach clenched. Impossible. Too ethereal for actual prints, more like the ghostly residue of touch. Frantic rubbing with a cloth proved futile. The marks remained embedded in the silvering. Decision made. They had to go, banished from the main floor. I wrestled them, one by one, into the cramped storage room at the back, the effort punctuated by grunts, their weight seeming to increase with my dread. Against the bare concrete wall, I arranged them. The storage room's single flickering overhead bulb cast harsh shadows, rendering the mirrors even more ominous. My heart hammered as I adjusted their positions. Standing back, I saw them all at once, 5 reflections arrayed before me, and each, despite my static posture, was subtly different. A bruise bloomed on one cheek, another radiated an unfamiliar vitality, a third slumped with exhaustion. A lump formed in my throat. My legs felt unsteady. Refusing to linger, I shrouded them again in the drop cloths and retreated, closing the door firmly behind me. The ensuing week was a study in strained normalcy. I tried to banish the mirrors from my thoughts, yet phantom sounds seemed to emanate from the storage room. A soft, intermittent tapping, a faint brushing noise. Entering the room induced a suffocating shortness of breath. I began leaving the light on in there too, a small ward against the palpable dread that pooled near its door. My appetite waned. Days were spent on edge, startled by the building's innocuous groans. Nights offered no respite, my mind projecting images of those reflections moving with unnerving autonomy, dreams filled with distorted versions of myself, older, younger, scarred, tattooed, each bearing an unnervingly alien expression. I'd jolt awake, pulse frantic, skin clammy. One quiet afternoon, alone in the shop's stillness, I ventured into the storage room to check inventory. I pushed open the door. The drop cloths lay pooled on the concrete floor. My chest tightened. My mouth went instantly dry. I knew I had covered them. Hesitantly, I stepped inside. My reflections regarded me, each subtly out of sync. The first tilted its head, inquisitive. The second seemed to hunch slightly. The third held a more direct, challenging gaze. The fourth and fifth remained largely still, yet I felt their eyes tracking my presence. Sweat beaded on my forehead, my throat constricted. A primal urge to smash them warred with the knowledge of their antique value, and a deeper, colder fear of unleashing. What? Words tumbled out, my voice a shaky betrayal of my composure. Why are you doing this? absurd addressing my own likenesses, yet the question demanded voice. Silence answered. The reflection on the far left canted its head further. The central figure lifted an arm fractionally, then let it fall. My heartbeat pounded, a frantic drum against my ears. I stood frozen, breathing shallowly. Action was required. Retreating to the room's far corner, I seized an old, heavy tarp. Trying to avert my gaze from the glass, I flung it over the first mirror. Then the second, the third. My fingers trembled, fumbling with the coarse material. My foot caught the corner of the third mirror, sending it staggering. I caught it just in time, muscles screaming with the strain. Finally, all 5 were hidden. Panting, I wiped my brow and fled the room. That night, locking the shop felt insufficient. Double-checking the bolts offered little comfort. A sense of violation permeated my thoughts, the mirrors an invasive presence in my mind. Dreams became a chaotic kaleidoscope, fractured reflections in countless mirrors, none mirroring my true movements, each presenting a subtly altered self, their expressions ranging from vacant to knowing. I woke repeatedly, heart racing, drenched in cold sweat. Morning, I marched straight to the storage room. Relief, thin but palpable, washed over me. The tarps remained undisturbed. Perhaps I could sell them quickly, quietly, to someone less observant. I stood there contemplating listings, descriptions. A leaden weight settled in my chest. My shoulders ached with residual tension. Then a sound, soft, insistent scraping, originating from behind the heavy canvas, like fingernails drawn across glass. My gaze shot to the corners of the room. Nothing. My stomach twisted into a knot. I realized I was holding my breath. Tentatively, I edged closer. The scraping ceased. Silence descended, thick and watchful. How long I stood there, listening to the absence of sound, I cannot say. Eventually, I backed out, locking the door behind me, the flimsy lock offering scant reassurance. A closed for the day sign appeared on my shop's front door. Behind the counter, I sat, attempting to regulate my breathing, the frantic thudding in my ears drowning out the silence. My phone buzzed, ignored. The mirrors dominated my thoughts, hulking presences in the back room. The rest of the day dissolved into aimless pacing, furtive glances towards the storage room door, a constant battle against the urge to check beneath the tarps. Every creak of the old building sent jolts through my system. My body thrummed with unrelieved tension. A dull ache pulsed in my lower back. My knees felt stiff, brittle with anxiety. Calling someone felt impossible. Who would believe such a tale? As evening bled into the sky, the realization struck that this existence was unsustainable. A plan formed: load the mirrors, transport them to the secure anonymity of a rented storage unit across town. Distance, perhaps, would bring peace. Fetching the dolly, I approached the storage room. The door groaned open, tarps steadfastly in place. Yet stepping over the threshold, the air felt denser, charged. My hands shook as I maneuvered the first mirror onto the dolly, careful to keep the tarp from slipping, refusing to meet any potential gaze through the heavy fabric. The frame felt unnaturally cold, pressing hard against my palms. Eyes fixed on the concrete floor, I wheeled it out, sliding it into the truck bed, bracing it with scrap lumber. Back for the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth. Each trip amplified the prickling sensation on my arms, the churning in my gut. Finally, tailgate secured, straps tightened, I locked the shop, ignited the engine, and pulled away, consciously avoiding the rearview mirror, terrified of glimpsing movement beneath the canvas shrouds. And so, here I sit, parked outside the sterile facade of the storage facility, the engine ticking cool. The wind sighs against the tarps in the truck bed behind me, a sound like dry whispers. My heart hammers a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My mouth is desert dry. Just unload them, slide them into the metal box, lock the door, walk away. Perhaps then oblivion. Perhaps then silence. Perhaps those other selves, those watchers in the glass, will finally fall quiet, confined to their new prison. I just want my life back. I want to erase the knowledge that my own reflection can betray me, want to quell the chilling certainty that versions of myself wait just behind the silvering, watching, always watching. The resonance of my own solitary tread through the vacant artery of the corridor raised the hairs on my neck. Night duty at Apex Manufacturing always possessed a spectral quality, yet this particular night felt taut, expectant. A palpable tension saturated the air, as though the colossal structure itself held its metallic breath, anticipating some imminent fracture. Little did I fathom that within hours, flight would become my only recourse, a desperate scramble to unveil a secret potent enough to extinguish my existence. My name is Elias. For half a year, the graveyard shift has claimed me as Apex's custodian, a role far from illustrious, but sufficient for sustenance, granting quiet stretches to wrestle with the novel gestating within me. The factory sprawls, a bewildering maze of assembly lines frozen mid-motion, shadowed storage vaults, and echoing hallways, most slumbering deeply under the cloak of night. This shift commenced like countless others, punching the clock at 10, a brief exchange with the departing day shift foreman, then immersion into the familiar rhythm of my rounds. The initial hours dissolved into the mundane, the swish of the mop across linoleum, the rattle of refuse into bins, routine. But as the clock crept towards 2, the ordinary fractured. Near the executive suites, a zone typically hushed and lifeless at this hour, muffled voices snagged my attention. Not inherently strange. Management occasionally burned midnight oil. Yet these tones were clandestine, urgent, emanating from a wing that should have been utterly deserted. Inquisitiveness, that treacherous impulse, overruled caution. As I drifted closer, the mop handle suddenly alien in my grip. As the hushed dialogue sharpened, fragments pierced the silence. Consignment due tomorrow, precisely midnight. Cannot tolerate exposure. Ensure all potential complications are neutralized. A frantic tempo began drumming against my ribs. This was no standard corporate discourse. Edging nearer, I risked a glance through a sliver of open doorway. The sight within chilled the marrow in my bones. 3 figures occupied the opulent office. Silas Thorne, our imposing CEO, Marcus Vance, the granite-faced head of security, and a third man, vaguely familiar, sharp-suited, whose presence felt dissonant. They were clustered around a glowing monitor, displaying intricate schematics of the factory floor. Thorn's finger stabbed at the screen. Ingress point here. The Nocturnal staff will remain oblivious. The unfamiliar associate inclined his head. And their discretion, reliable, generously compensated for their silence, Vance interjected, his voice flat, devoid of inflection. Should anyone develop inconvenient curiosity, well, industrial environments are prone to unfortunate accidents. A sound must have escaped me, a sharp intake of breath, the scuff of a worn soul. In perfect synchrony, 3 heads snapped towards the doorway, eyes locking onto mine. Time snagged, stretching into an unbearable stillness. Then, pandemonium erupted. "Secure him!" Thorn's command cracked like a whip. I didn't linger. Instinct propelled me backward, heart hammering a frantic tattoo against my sternum. Footfalls pounded close behind, gaining ground with terrifying speed. My intimate knowledge of Apex's labyrinthine guts became my shield. Down one echoing passage, through a cavernous storeroom choked with obsolete parts, scrambling up a grated metal staircase. I fled. Lungs burned, muscles screamed protest, but primal fear was a relentless engine. I burst into the main assembly arena, a vast cathedral of dormant industry, its colossal machines hulking like sleeping metal beasts. Weaving between silent conveyor belts and skeletal robotic arms, my mind raced, trying to assemble the jagged pieces, clandestine shipments, neutralized complications, manufactured accidents. Illegality bled from every syllable I'd overheard. Danger. Escape was imperative, a call to the authorities essential. But my phone lay dormant in my locker, and every exit would now be a guarded choke point. A strategy was needed. Gasping for air behind the bulk of a colossal press, an idea sparked, the omnipresent eyes of the factory's security network. It recorded everything. Accessing that footage would yield irrefutable proof. The security hub, however, lay across the sprawling complex, and the nearing sounds of pursuit confirmed the peril. Caution and cunning were my only allies now. Melting into the deep shadows, I navigated the familiar patrol paths in reverse, exploiting my janitorial knowledge. Every clank of distant metal, every shifting umbra sent jolts of adrenaline through me. Yet inch by painstaking inch, I neared the security office. The door yielded to my master key, a small perk of the profession. Inside, a constellation of monitors displayed silent, watchful perspectives from every corner of the plant. And there, starkly illuminated on one screen, were 3 figures methodically sweeping the corridors, searching for me. With trembling fingers, I navigated the system's interface, spooling through recordings until the damning scene materialized, the clandestine meeting, the incriminating dialogue. I jammed a USB drive into the port, initiating the download, my fragile passport from this waking nightmare. Just as the progress bar reached completion, voices echoed in the corridor immediately outside, too close. Pocketing the drive, I scanned frantically. The air vent, small, grimy, but potentially viable. I'd barely wrenched the grate free when the door exploded inward. Marcus Vance stood framed in the doorway, firearm steady in his grip, his expression a mask of cold retribution. "This is where your shift ends, Elias," he stated, leveling the weapon. "Should have stuck to emptying bins." In that fractured second, survival obliterated thought. I lunged for the dark aperture of the vent, the displaced air from a passing bullet whispering past my ear. I scrambled into the ductwork's tight embrace, the crack of gunshots and enraged shouts receding as I wormed deeper into the building's metallic viscera. Time dissolved in the oppressive darkness, crawling through endless tunnels where every scrape resonated like thunder. My skin grew raw against the rough metal. The constricted space stole my breath. But the certainty of what waited behind propelled me onward. Finally, a glimmer of faint light ahead. I emerged, tumbling onto the graveled rooftop, the cool night air a shocking balm after the suffocating closeness. The city lights sprawled below, a glittering tapestry of normalcy, achingly near yet worlds away. Behind me, the heavy clang of the roof access door reverberated. They knew, trapped, with nowhere left to retreat, I embraced the only desperate option remaining. I leaped. The adjacent building loomed close, yet the chasm yawned impossibly wide. For one heart-stopping eternity, suspended mid-air, failure seemed certain. Then impact, a jarring collision that resonated through every bone, no time for relief. I ran, vaulting from one rooftop to the next, dredging up half-forgotten parkour skills from a reckless youth. Behind me, angry shouts punctuated the night, occasionally underscored by the sharp report of gunfire. How I descended from those heights to the sanctuary of the streets below remains a fragmented memory, a blur of shadowed alleyways and furtive glances over my shoulder, each flicker of movement a potential pursuer. As the first tentative fingers of dawn painted the sky, I found myself staggering towards the unwavering blue light of a police station, exhausted, bruised, yet undeniably alive, the small USB drive clutched in my fist like a sacred relic. The ensuing days became a maelstrom of depositions, FBI debriefings, and glaring headlines. The data stick held more than just the hushed tones of that fateful meeting. It unraveled a vast smuggling enterprise operating under Apex's legitimate facade for years. Arrests followed swiftly, ensnaring Thorne, Vance, and numerous executives. The corporation imploded under the weight of scandal, and I was unexpectedly cast as a reluctant hero, a whistleblower. Yet, even as the chaos subsided and a semblance of normalcy returned, the sensation of being watched lingered, a persistent phantom limb of fear. The hypervigilance that had ensured my survival that night remained embedded, causing me to start at sudden noises, to regard unfamiliar faces with ingrained suspicion. I left the city soon after, leveraging a portion of the reward money to forge a new beginning elsewhere. The novel, ironically, found its completion, its narrative infused with the raw terror of my ordeal, eventually finding unexpected success as a thriller. Sometimes, in the deepest hours of the night, the ghost of pursuing footsteps echoes in my mind. The icy grip of being hunted momentarily returns. But then I anchor myself to the truth. I endured. I navigated unimaginable peril and emerged, scarred but whole. And if that crucible could be survived, then surely I possess the fortitude to confront whatever shadows the future may cast. The night shift at Apex Manufacturing irrevocably altered the trajectory of my life. It exposed the darkness concealed beneath polished veneers, but in doing so, it illuminated the unexpected depths of my own resilience. Ultimately, that self-knowledge proves more valuable than any paycheck, any reward. The first glimpse I had of them, the Thorns, Julian, Ilara, and their sprite of a daughter, they felt less like new arrivals and more like a misplaced piece of idyllic Americana finally slotted onto our sleepy Crescent Drive. Oh, a flawless tableau. Yet here I stand, the flimsy wood of my bedroom door groaning under Julian Thorne's assault, the barricade I've thrown together trembling, and the brutal truth crashes down. Perfection is often just the most convincing mask for the abyss. It began under the benign gaze of a summer sun 3 months past. The raw edges of my divorce were still sharp, my life a mosaic I was painstakingly reassembling within the 4 walls I'd fought tooth and nail to retain. Then, the hulking moving van arrived next door, breathing life into the house that had stood sentinel and silent for almost a year. Through the sheer veil of my curtains, I watched them disembark. Julian, possessing a casual grace, tall, with a smile that etched pleasant lines around his eyes. Ilara, delicate and fair, her pale hair swept back with an effortless elegance, and little Lily, maybe 5, maybe 6 winters old, pirouetting in their wake, a threadbare stuffed rabbit Captain Cuddles clutched tight. A pang, sharp and unwelcome, resonated within me, envy for the effortless portrait of family they presented, a dream I'd chased but never captured. Still, the rights of neighborliness beckoned. Armed with a still warm platter of chocolate chip cookies, I crossed the lawn. Ilara opened the door, her smile a genuine sunbeam. "Oh, how utterly kind," she breathed, taking the offering. "Julian, Lily, our neighbor is here." They materialized beside her, a perfect composition. Julian's handshake was firm, his gaze direct. "A pleasure to meet you," he declared. "We're eager to become part of this place." Lily peered from the sanctuary behind her mother's legs, a shy nebula of curiosity. I crouched to her level. "Hello there, Lily. I admire your rabbit. Does he have a name?" She offered a solemn nod. "Captain Cuddles," came the whisper. A smile tugged at my lips, so utterly, disarmingly normal. What intuition could have possibly pierced that veneer? In the subsequent weeks, the Thorns wove themselves into the neighborhood fabric with seamless dexterity. Ilara found her place in the local book circle. Julian offered his time to the fledgling Little League. Their backyard barbecue became the talk of the street, a gathering bathed in golden light and easy laughter. Everyone was charmed. I found myself drawn into Ilara's orbit. Morning coffees became a ritual after Julian departed for his day and Lily for her schooling. We'd linger in her kitchen, a space of almost unnerving spotlessness, sharing whispers and laughter that felt ancient, familiar. "I am so profoundly glad we came here," Ilara confessed one morning, her fingers laced around a steaming ceramic mug. It was precisely the change we required after everything. My curiosity flickered. "Oh, was there trouble at the old place?" A fleeting darkness, quick as a startled bird, crossed her features before vanishing. "Oh, the usual," she deflected lightly. "Sometimes a clean slate is all one needs." I let it rest, unwilling to probe. We all carried our unvoiced histories. But time, relentless and observant, began to reveal fissures. Minuscule at first, easily dismissed, the almost imperceptible way Ilara recoiled if Julian's movements were abrupt, the muffled cadence of arguments filtering through the walls late at night, the slow dimming of Lily's bright energy, replaced by a watchful quietude. I chided myself, convinced I was projecting the ghosts of my own failed union onto their seemingly unblemished life. Yet the discordant notes persisted. One languid afternoon, tending my roses, a sharp crash erupted from the Thorn residence, followed swiftly by Ilara's stifled cry. I froze, trowel suspended, straining to hear. Silence descended thick and heavy, broken only by the low murmur of Julian's voice, the words indistinct. Ilara made no further sound. That night became a battlefield of indecision. Intervene, speak out, but the fear of misjudgment, of shattering their lives based on suspicion, held me captive. Ultimately, I resolved to approach Ilara directly. The next morning, coffee invitation extended, I steeled myself. She arrived bearing a faint discoloration on her cheekbone, artfully yet imperfectly masked by concealer. "Ilara," I began, my voice hushed. "What happened?" Her hand flew to her face, a gesture of practiced nonchalance. This, oh clumsy me, met the kitchen cabinet rather forcefully. I drew a steadying breath. "Ilara, I heard, yesterday, I heard something. Are you certain everything is all right?" Her eyes widened, a momentary flash of stark terror illuminating them before the practiced calm resettled. "Perfectly," she insisted, her tone unnaturally buoyant. Julian and I couldn't be happier. The plea I saw trapped behind her gaze silenced my urge to press further. She wasn't ready. I couldn't compel her. A chill permeated our interactions thereafter. Ilara's invitations ceased. Our encounters on the street were marked by smiles that didn't quite reach her eyes. And Julian began to watch me. Across the manicured lawns, I'd feel his stare, cold, appraising. A primal instinct screamed then, police, hotline, something. But cowardice anchored me. Not my place. Perhaps I'm mistaken. Excuses whispered until the night lily's scream tore through the midnight quiet. Sleep had eluded me. I sat by my window, lost in thought when it came, a child's raw shriek of terror abruptly choked off. Before conscious thought could form, I was across the lawn, fists hammering on their door. Julian answered, tousled, eyes smoldering with ill-contained fury. "What?" he spat. I heard, "Is Lily all right?" The words tumbled out, his features morphed, concern overlaying the rage like a poorly fitted mask. "Nightmare," he stated smoothly. "She's fine. Go home." But past his shoulder, my gaze snagged on Ilara. One eye was swollen completely shut, a trickle of blood staining her split lip. Our eyes locked for a fraction of a second, and in hers I saw raw, desperate supplication. "I'm calling the police," I whispered, my voice trembling. Julian's control fractured. "You're calling no one," he growled, advancing. I spun to flee, but he was quicker, his fingers closing like iron bands around my arm, wrenching me inside. The door slammed, sealing the world out. Chaos erupted. Julian's voice, a torrent of rage, alternated between venomous threats and gasping attempts to rationalize, to convince me of my delusion. Ilara huddled in a far corner, clutching Lily, both vibrating with fear. A desperate surge of adrenaline propelled me free towards the guest room. The lock clicked shut just as his weight hit the door. My fingers, clumsy with panic, found my phone, miraculously tucked into my robe pocket. The 911 dispatcher's voice, an anchor of calm in the storm. Help was coming. Hold on. But Julian was pounding, bellowing, the wood groaning, splintering. So I wait, praying. Blue and red strobes now paint the walls in frantic patterns, visible through the gap in the curtains. Will they breach the threshold in time? With a final, sickening crack, the door implodes. Julian fills the doorway, eyes feral, a glint of polished steel, a kitchen knife gripped in his fist. Time warps, stretching impossibly. The blade arcs towards me. Ilara's scream echoes from somewhere deeper in the house. Then, abruptly, a cacophony of new voices. Police. Freeze. Julian's expression slackens, rage displaced by stunned confusion. The knife clatters onto the carpet. He crumples under a swarm of uniformed bodies. The hours that follow dissolve into a disorienting montage. Questions asked, answers given numbly. Ilara and Lily, swathed in blankets, spectral figures guided towards waiting ambulances. Julian, cuffed, thrust into a patrol car, his face granite, eyes locking onto mine with chilling intensity as he's driven away. As dawn bleeds into the sky, a policewoman with kind eyes approaches. "You did the right thing," she murmurs. "You likely saved their lives." But watching Ilara and Lily disappear down the street, contemplating the months of suspicion I'd harbored, the inaction I'd chosen, heroism feels like a borrowed coat, ill-fitting and heavy. The officer senses my turmoil. "Hey," she says softly, "don't carry that. You acted when it counted." I nod, but the guilt remains, a persistent, gnawing ache. Returning to the sanctuary of my own home, the street feels irrevocably altered. The placid suburban veneer lies shattered. In the days that follow, fragments of the thorns' past surface, whispers of previous towns, hasty departures, a pattern of veiled fear left in their wake. How many others, I wonder, saw the warnings and chose silence? Ilara and Lily never return. Word filters back they've sought refuge with family, far away. I hope peace finds them, that healing is possible. I am left with the chilling certainty that darkness thrives behind the most ordinary facades, and that true neighborliness sometimes demands the courage to shatter the silence, to risk everything for a cry in the dark. The house next door stands vacant now, a hollow monument to the secrets it guarded. And each night, I find myself watching the windows around me, wondering about the hidden dramas unfolding behind drawn curtains, wondering if I'll possess the strength should another scream pierce the quiet.